want to take a look at Numbers 11, 1 to 4. So we talked, remember, about the quail in Numbers 11. That was just last week when we looked at God's humility, how he would so often give them what they wanted. We looked at quite a few examples of that. We used the term accommodation. God accommodated or provided their needs and even their desires in many cases. And in this case, in Numbers 11, he gave them quail. And we basically started with verse 4, where the Israelites started asking for flesh food because they were tired of the manna, if you remember. And so we went through that from verse 4 on, but you may have noticed some troubling verses before that, and we'll look at that today. Numbers 11, verses 1 to 4. Evans, can you read that, please?
Okay, and when the people complained, it is displeased the Lord, and the Lord had it, and his hunger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burnt among them, and consumed them that were in the uttermost part of the camp. And the people cried unto Moses, and when Moses prayed unto the Lord, the fire was quenched. Okay. And he called the name of the place the Taberah, because the fire of the Lord burned among them. And the mixed multitude was among them felt a lasting, and the children of Israel also wept again and said, Who shall give us flesh to eat?
Okay, thank you, Evans. Evans' reading is improving there. Of course, his first language is not English, but we can read it along with him. So we're pretty much understanding you, Evans. Thank you.
Yeah, good job.
So while God will accommodate, it could seem that at other times he just flies off the handle for as little a problem as complaining and starts killing people. Could you get that from this passage?
Yep.
It certainly looks like that, doesn't it? Does that sound reasonable that God would act like that?
No.
Like, don't complain or I'll kill you. Let's read this verse, which would prompt us to think about that a little bit more. Isaiah 1:18.
Come now and let us reason together, says the Lord. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they are red as crimson, they shall be as wool.
The question is this reasonable? And if it isn't, then we need to dig deeper, right? We need to take a closer look. Maybe we need to look at word meanings. Maybe there's something hidden or mysterious in those verses.
You know, on that word complained, I have a note saying spoke evil. So that when the people, complained, they were actually speaking evil.
I just wanted to put that in there because we're going to look at a number of the words used in there carefully, and I didn't find anything on that one. It could be they were speaking evil of the Lord.
Yeah.
We're going to get into these words, but again, the character of God in the Gospel Glossary becomes important because we need to allow the Bible to define its own terms, right? And another thing I like to say about that is that God knew that word meanings would change over time. And we find word meanings changing today. So he built into his word a system allowing the Bible to define its own terms. Through looking at how the Bible uses different terms, we can work out the definition directly. So complained is speaking evil. We're just going to go through these words. Anger, okay, it says his anger was kindled. Anger or wrath is basically God allowing the consequences of our actions. When you allow the Bible to define its own terms, you'll find that that's what it means. We're not going to go through that again in detail, but here's the link. The wrath, anger definition. And then it says the fire of the Lord. And I put the link in here for the meaning of fire. And the actual word for fire is ash in Hebrew. It means fire. Well, it usually means fire, a few other minor translations here. A figurative meaning for that is God's anger. Okay, so that word ash can mean God's anger, not literal fire, but a figurative use. Okay, this is my booklet, The Lake of Fire and the Second Death. It's different editions and some different covers, but there's one cover. In there, I've got this section looking at the Hebrew words, and I've put it in here. The word for man, as distinct from woman, in Hebrew is ish, and it looks like this. That's on the left, yod, shin. You read from right to left in Hebrew. The yod here is the smallest letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it's equivalent to the Greek letter iota, and is translated as jot in this verse. Till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall no wise pass from the law. So it's that small letter. So the yod means or has reference to the hand of God, specifically his right hand, the Messiah. When the hand of God is removed from man, when the letter yod is removed from the word for man, the result is the Hebrew word for fire. And you can see that here. You've got the aleph, yod, shin. You minus or take out the yod, and you're left with aleph, shin, which is a word for fire. And the suggestion was that man then burns, okay? And that's much of that is taken from this Lake of Fire booklet. So another way of looking at that came to mind just this morning. And it's this, that when you have man and you take out the yod, what you're left with is fire, but not saying that man will burn, is saying the result of this, of taking God out of man where he intends and hopes to dwell, will result in the fire of the Lord, as in his anger was kindled. Okay, his anger or wrath is not that his steaming mad and going to throw thunderbolts and things at us, is that his disappointed. When it says he hides his face sometimes in wrath, it's not that his just so mad, it's that is basically crying in the corner, you could say. It upsets him to be separated from us, who he loves so much. Okay, so just a different way of looking at that. Here's the word for burnt. This is where we're going next. And the fire of the Lord burnt among them. So burnt, a figurative meaning for it here is this: Jehovah's wrath, human wrath. That's the figurative use. So when it says the fire of the Lord burnt, it's not talking about physical fire burning things. It's talking about God's wrath, his disappointment, actually. And then here where it says burnt among them, I put in the whole verse here with all of the Strong's numbers out of my Bible software. And you can see I've highlighted the words among them. There's no Strong's number here, which was kind of curious. So the fire of the Lord, it gives the number for that. Burnt, it gives the number for that. Among them, there's no number there. Those words among them do not appear in italics, but the italics are not always used consistently. Sometimes they should be in there, should be there, and they're not. I didn't check this out further, but it just kind of makes me suspicious that this burned among them maybe doesn't even belong there.
Mm-hmm.
So if we were to take that out, it would be the fire of the Lord burned and consumed them that were in the uttermost parts. Okay, so we need to look at this word consumed. And I put here the link for the study we did previously on consumed, so you can go there. You got to look at all these words. It's a bit of work. But consumed can have other meanings than to be burned up.
Hey, Ray,
Yes.
have you heard of that phenomenon where people literally start on fire?
Yeah, it's called spontaneous human combustion.
Yes.
I remember reading an article in the Reader's Digest about that when I was a kid,
Oh, yes.
and that scared me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was very scary. I was kind of like,
Does that really happen?
Oh yeah.
it has
Yeah,
happened. It's
I
very
read
rare.
a story about that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's documented cases.
Yeah. So anyway, this word consumed, I may have to rearrange this a bit more yet, but this is where, just a reminder, when we do these studies, it's kind of our first run through some of these things, and then we go and edit this, and I finally will put them on the website. But so we may not, certainly don't understand it completely yet, or even then. But let's read these verses. Whose turn is it to read?
I can read that one. 10:2.
Okay, sure.
I'm already there.
Yep.
So fire went out from the Lord and devoured them, and they died before the Lord.
Okay, keep that in mind. And then Axel, if you could read Leviticus 10:5.
So they went near and carried them in their coats out of the camp, and as Moses had said.
Okay, so when you look at those two verses together, what kind of comes to mind? Is there something kind of odd about that?
That their coats weren't burned.
Yeah, so fire came and devoured them. There should be in ashes, and yet they're still in their coats.
Mm-hmm.
This is not literal fire, and it's not literal devouring or consuming. And okay, another word in here is quenched. And when Moses prayed unto the Lord, the fire was quenched. If you take the original word for quenched, and here it is, this Hebrew H8257, it never means, it's never used in the sense of putting a fire out. Okay, the real word here is to sink, or to, kind of fall down or subside or something, just to lessen, I guess. So whatever this fire is, figurative fire, that was affecting these people in the uttermost parts of the camp, it went down, it decreased. Where it says uttermost parts, I don't have a diagram here, but if you remember, when they set up in the desert, they would have the sanctuary in the middle of the camp, and they would have 3 tribes on the north, and 3 on the south, 3 on the east, and 3 on the west. Of the 12 tribes of Israel, they'd be arranged in a certain order around the tabernacle. And then outside of that, which is referred to as the uttermost parts of the camp, would be that mixed multitude of people that came with them from Egypt. These are people that were not Israelites. They were not in any one of the 12 tribes. They just, I guess, it doesn't say much about them, but they saw that the Israelites and their God had overcome the most powerful nation on earth. They took off out of Egypt, having spoiled the Egyptians. They were going to something called the Promised Land. Many of these people, Egypt had been destroyed basically by the plagues. They just decided, let's go with Israel. Now they still had a lot of their heathen beliefs and customs, and they caused a lot of trouble to Israel along the way. But they were there, the mixed multitude, in the uttermost parts of the camp. So it says, consume them that were in the uttermost parts of the camp. This is the mixed multitude. And then in verse 4, it says, and the mixed multitude that was among them fell a-lusting. Apparently they were still alive. So this mixed multitude were not burned up. They were still alive. So there's just, we don't totally understand what this means, but there's a whole bunch of clues in the different words that are used there that point to a possible different meaning for that passage. Does that sound better than God just burning up people that complain?
Oh yeah.
Maybe we need some of that sort of fear of God in us so we don't complain. But that doesn't help us to trust him, does it?
If you're grateful for everything you have, then you're not going to be complaining.
Right, good point. Yeah, a good reason to be grateful. Gratitude is great. Okay, so that's just a quick study. I'll put that in a separate video.
I was just going to add something.
Yep.
it says the fire of the Lord. Well, there's verses where it talks about the sword of the Lord, but when you read on, you find out he uses like Nebuchadnezzar and some of these other kingdoms as his sword. And so could that also be the fire of the Lord is something else? It's not his fire. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, it could be his fire, but it's not literal fire that consumes things to ashes.
Right.
Because the sword of the Lord is his sword, but we know that the sword, well, it's likened to the word, isn't it?
Word.
Right.
Yeah. So, but that's helpful, Paul. Thank you. Because we can understand sword of the Lord in a different way, gives us confidence that perhaps fire of the Lord is meant in a different way as well.
Right.
Similar. And there might be others as well like that. It'd be good to make a bit of a list.
Yeah, I have to